Hello my nostalgia loving friends. Today I'm going to take you on a full tutorial of my build of Bewitched. This STL file comes from UEL Winner. If you love nostalgic TV and stuff like that, cartoons from our past, check them out. There'll be a link in the description below to the STL file for Bewitched, and I'll also put a link in the description below for his Patreon. There's 13 parts all in this build. I'm going to take you through the cleanup and I'll show you everything, all the little pitfalls you may run into, because we are selling this on the shop. So let's get into the build. First thing we're going to start on is the background. Now make sure that there's no deviations on this because there could be pinholes and stuff like that. You want to get supports out of the keys, and there are 3 keys on this particular spot. This is for the broom, and then we got one above it, that's for the Bewitched logo, and then we got one for the moon up top. And here I'm just taking my X-Acto knife, getting into the key, taking out these little supports that are left over to make sure it's all clean and good, because like I said, that's going to give you a very bad time later on. If you have a little gunk in there, it's not going to fit in right, and the piece is very heavy that's going in there. The next thing that we're going to have to do on this piece now that it's cleaned up is we got to fill in these drain holes. We got a bunch on the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up here, and we want to make sure those are closed in because we don't want to see those. And then we got 2 more on the bottom of the base, and then we got a whole bunch on the back. You really don't have to do the back because you're not going to see it. I did mine because I like a nice smooth finish. There's a few ways you can fill these holes in. You can use Bondo, you can use Milliput, you can use Tamiya putty, or you can use resin. I'm always touching the pieces, and what I found was all the support nubs. So all I'm doing here is I took my Mr. G tool, and the rotating head toothbrush looking thingy, and I'm taking down all those support nubs to make everything smooth. Like I said, I like things smooth. I did rush a little bit on this build, but I try to do as much as I could, but I wanted to get this video out to you, especially if you're going to be buying the kit. Just running back and forth until I get all these nubs down, and then I'll clean it up. Next thing to do is get all that resin dust off. I'm going to use some alcohol and a paper towel. Yes, I put not water on there so nobody hurts themselves thinking it's water. Just a little bit on there, and then I'm going to wipe down the back, get all that dust off there, make sure everything's nice and clean and prepped for us to do some priming later on. And here we go. The prep work continues, so don't let anybody tell you that 3D printing is 1, 2, 3 off the printer. The next thing I'm going to use is my display, and I'm going to use a G tool and all sorts of tools to get the nubs down. Across the bottom here, there's the support nubs across here that I have to take those down because when we put it into the key, it's not going to fit properly. And again, it's going to mess you up and you're going to get a little frustrated. So always clean up your parts as best you can. We always miss a support mark or 2, and we can go back and get those hopefully before we start painting and all that other good stuff. So I'm just going to run the display here, get all those down, and then move on from there. So of course I wanted to speed up my workflow. I grabbed the Mr. G Tool Pro and I started doing the nubs here on the bottom. Make sure these are ones you want to get rid of because it lines up on the bottom and it may make your backing askew and you don't want the background to look crooked. And if you haven't yet, pick up one of these nail salon nail dust collectors. It's the greatest thing in the world for grabbing all that resin dust, especially if you don't have a downdraft table and you're working in a small spot, and also make sure you're wearing a mask. And sometimes you got to break out the heavy artillery. I was having real big problems with this little nub here, so I took out the metal files, my rounded one, and I just got rid of that thing. I'm not really too worried about deep scratches. Actually, I'm not worried about it at all because this is going to be inside the key. And make sure you test fit your 3D parts because sometimes keys expand, contract. The file is off a little bit, and as you can see, I can't get this piece into the base, and that's because the bottom lip is bigger than the base. So I'm going to have to take care of that by trimming down the little lip so we could get this in. And to trim this guy down, we're going to go over to the handy dandy razor saw. Why the razor saw? Because I can make a nice straight cut, and if I use clippers or something like that, sometimes the resin will snap and it's going to be a nightmare for you because it's going to either crack the back or it's going to snap the whole thing off and you're not going to be able to put it into the bottom correctly. So I just sliced on the bottom. I'm going to slice down the top, take a little piece off. This way we could get it into the key. Now that slight corner we took off, when we're test fitting again, everything fits really, really good in here. The only problem that I did notice is there is a little bit of a gap down the front of the base with the top of the base, but that's no big deal. The Cityscape is going to block that off and you're not going to see any gappage in the back. Now these little nubs here on the bottom of the base, we got to take those off too. It's only really on the one side. Now you hear me talk a lot about putting spheres on the top of your supports, and this is why I put them on, because it's a lot easier to sand that down. If we didn't put spheres on top, all those little dots you see would be divots and we'd have to fill that all in with putty or resin. Now I'm just going to go over to my Mr. G tool and we're going to sand those down, get it nice and smooth, and it'll be perfect. Now time for the cityscape. This is a cool little cityscape, but I want to tell you one thing. You see this little notch here? That is a weak point of the city. So be very careful. Don't bend it when you're putting it into the base. Be very careful how you push it in, because if it snaps, it's gone. You're going to have to try to put that together, and I don't know how you will if it snaps really bad. There is a little support between there. I'm going to make sure, we're going to test it, we're going to see if it fits. It looks like it's fitting in there, no problem. But unfortunately, again, the key is a little larger than the bottom key, so I'm going to have to do some adjustments on it. And you guessed it, back to the razor saw. I'm just going to cut another little chunk off. This way we can make that fit. But if you're going to use your razor saw on this piece, please, please, please be careful. I don't want you to break your cityscape and then have to call me and we'll try to print you one up or something like that. But just be careful with this. Like I said, this is not the it's a solid piece, but that one point is very weak. Taking off that little notch helped, but front to back, we still couldn't get it in there. It was too tight. So I'm just going to take off some on the front. I'm going to go very slowly because I don't want to take too much off. I want to make sure all the parts meet and we can glue them together properly. More test fitting, and it's not sitting in there all the way. So the pegs now fit in there. Now we got to figure out why it's not going all the way down. You can see the little bit of gap over there. So we're going to correct this issue. And how we're going to correct it? Of course, we're going to take out the Dremel with the diamond bit point over here, and we're going to dig out what we have to, scrape it down, and then we're going to test fit the part again. But before we test fit the part, we got to make sure we clean that out. Otherwise, it's going to snag up and it's not going to fit properly. Finally, after all that adjusting, we got the piece in, no gaps back or front. It fits in there nice and snug. I don't even need glue if I don't want to put glue in here. I'm just happy I got it done. I didn't use alcohol in there. I used a spray can to blow out the dust. Now my favorite part of the diorama, the logo for Bewitched. I love this thing. Time to test fit it in here. It does have a little wiggle to it up and down, but that's no big deal. We can set it in place, put a little CA in there, put kicker on it, and we'll be good to go, and it'll set up in the exact position that we want it in. The end of the broom bristles, this is just solid resin, so I'm just cleaning up all the support marks on here. Unfortunately, towards the end of the build, we're gonna rework this because I noticed something on here that was frustrating me, and I looked at the cartoon and I fixed it up a different way. Time to test fit the broom in that slot. It looks like there are some support marks left in there, so I'm gonna get in there and dig out. I did do it at the beginning, but I feel like there's something still in there, so I'm just gonna scrape that out so I could get the broom in there properly. Now I'm just testing the broom handle in there, and that fits in nicely. The flat end goes towards the broom, the round end towards the outside. Now that I know it fits well, I'm just going in here at super speed. I wish I was this fast. Actually cleaning up the Bewitched symbol and also the broomstick, getting all of the nubs off here, making sure everything's nice and cleaned up. More cleanup, of course. We got to do the arms. You're going to have to look out for support marks, especially on the palm and the fingertips. I missed those. For some reason, I thought they were fingernails, but they're actually support marks. They're little nubs on the tips, so make sure you get those, file them down carefully, but don't file them down too much where you lose your fingertips. She has no fingernail polish or anything like that, so you don't have to worry about that at all. So I'm just going to do the same thing on both hands. We're going to take our files or our Mr. G tools and carefully take down the support marks, make everything smooth. This way we're ready for primer and paint. Time to test fit her arm. I thought it looked good in there, and I made a major mistake towards the end of this build thinking that was in there good, but we'll find out later on that it's not. And just moving over to the nubs on her legs, there's a lot of support marks on her legs and on her booty, so we're gonna have to take care of those, and I just did that with the G tool, took those down nice and quickly. There's some on her shoes that you're gonna have to take care of, and also in that little semicircle for the broom. So just make sure you get all those, especially the ones on the broom, because you don't want that getting snagged up trying to push that through. Sometimes on a 3D print, you can have a slight layer shift, and you can see it there a little bit. This is my personal one. The other ones are fine. But usually, I would say 9 out of 10 times, you can just sand those down and get that out instead of having to throw a whole resin piece away if you're 3D printing on your own. And off to clean up on the cape so she could fly around with her little cape in the air. But this is easy enough. There's only a few support marks up inside the cape. Most of the support marks are around the edges, which are really easy to take care of. Just get yourself a little sandpaper or whatever tool you're using and clean them up nice and clean. Time to test fit the cape. It's got these two little nubs over here that go into these two little holes. This is not a good setup. They should have been a little deeper. This way you could get them in there. The holes were a little shallow. The pins are a little small. So this part was really a pain in the neck. Later on, I just take those pins off and I'll show you. We glue the cape right to her shoulders. Time to mess with her head and get it in here. Her head doesn't fit very well inside. I had a lot of problem with the key work on this kit, but it's a little elbow grease, a little trimming things down, and we could get it in. Right here on this pipe or rounded portion, that's the part that I'm gonna have to trim down, sand it down. This way we could get it in there. Don't clip anything off like I said before. Just make sure you're sanding things down. You don't want anything to snap. When I'm sanding things down for key placement, I only take a little off at a time because we don't want her head to be a bobblehead. So I'll do a little bit, take it out, I'll sand some more, put it back in until we get the right fit. So over here, I'm gonna have to sand that down just a little bit more so we could get a nice tight fit. After about 4 or 5 rounds of sanding, finally that triangle fits right into her dress and it's nice and level so we don't have any flesh tones sticking up. And of course, my first run of prints are always test runs. You can see here there's a little bit of a layer shift on mine. New ones don't have that. So I'm just taking my G tool, I'm getting down that line. I'll have a nice smooth piece. This is a solid piece of resin, so it works out fine. Usually have an okay time getting rid of these things depending on what part of the model it's on. If it was across her face, I would have chucked this and got a whole new piece out. After I got rid of that layer line, now it's to go back in and get rid of all the little nubs. We don't want any of those showing. But unfortunately, somehow, I always miss 1 or 2 and they're visible. And half the time I don't want to go back because I already painted something. So just go over your models, make sure all those little support nubs are gone. Guarantee you miss at least 1. Time to test fit her hat. It's a little peg that goes into the round hole over here. That hole is not big enough, so I'm just going to get out my Dremel. I'm going to widen the hole. This way the peg fits in there. It's a very simple task. If you don't have a Dremel, or actually I should say if you don't have this little diamond point tip for your Dremel, get it. It's a real help and you can get into spots like this. Just open it up, push it in a little deeper, and we'll have that pin fit in there. Now that I opened up that key, the hat fits in here really nicely and she's looking good. Next up is the moon to clean up. I really hate printing globes like this. Over here, you're gonna have all your support marks. Make sure you really get those down. You think you get them down and they're kind of wavy. You're gonna have to fill in the drain hole up top. And on the top, there's gonna be a little pinhole that you just fill in with a little Bondo or filler. Just sand that down and you'll be good to go on that. Let's test fit the moon. It's not the peg that really keeps it out. I did shave down the peg some, but there's a little gap there, so shave down the peg some. But when you're messing with the moon and putting in there, flip it from the one side to the other, because once I flipped it, it actually worked out better, that there was less of a gap, a real no noticeable gap. But the other thing also that I'm doing is I'm making sure that the support marks that we were cleaning up on the back of this moon were to the back of the panel. This way those don't show if we make a mistake or anything like that, because they're a little difficult to clean up. Now to work on the hat. I have support marks here on the tip, but I did change the orientation of this, so when you get your kit, it's not going to have them there. It's going to have more on the bottom here. You're going to have your support marks. Mine, again, this was a test print, so I have some layer line shifts. I'm just going to sand those out, get it nice and flat, and it'll be good to go. Now we have to clean up those drain holes. You could use Milliput, you can use Bondo, or any other type of filler. I'm going to use resin. For the drain holes, I'm using my Anycubic resin, an old paintbrush. I just put a little in the hole, light it up, and get it to set up. Now, there's a problem with resin doing this. It's going to be layer by layer. If your light is not strong enough to make it through all those layers, you're going to have a goopy mess in between. So I don't really recommend this method for any type of big holes or huge gaps or anything like that. For these tiny holes, I should be good to go, curing them up and having a solid piece and then sanding them down. We're going to do this for all the drain holes on the kit. Now that I have the drain hole for the moon all filled in, the next thing I want to do is sand this thing down and make sure it's level with the other surface. We don't want to see that during priming or painting. Well, if we see it during priming, at least we could go back and fix it before the paint is done. So just make sure you have an even surface and move on with your build. A lot of times on 3D prints, you're going to get these pinholes, especially at peaks. She has one on the top of her hair. I'm just taking a little resin like we did before, putting it on my paintbrush, filling in that little pinhole that we got up top, and then I'm going to sand it down, make sure it's nice and smooth and level like we're doing with everything else. But first, I got to cure it, make sure it's cured up before we do any type of sanding, and her hair will look good and we can prime and paint. And if you're curious what I do with the extra resin, I just put it back in the bottle, I grab my UV flashlight and I cure up anything that's in the cup. This way I'm not throwing out liquid resin into the garbage. Now the fun part, all the tiny holes on the back, on the bottom, and also on the top of the back plate of the diorama. I am OCD about this. I'm not going to let the holes be there. I'm going to fill all that in, just test fitting the moon again. It's got a snug fit. I'm going to actually have to sand that down a little bit more up here to get that to fit in. I know cleanup is boring, so I did this off camera. I filled in all the holes with the resin. I sanded down the back plate. Now I'm just going to sand down the other ones on the bottom plate. This way those are all filled in too. I use my G tool to make sure everything is nice and flat and even because I want a nice coat of paint on there. I don't want bumps and ripples and all that other good stuff. I was still having problems with the moon, so I broke out the Dremel again and I opened up the female key a lot more so that the moon can slide in there and make sure that the gap that we were seeing at the bottom isn't there. We don't want any kind of ambient light coming through the bottom because that's going to ruin the effect of the diorama. More test fitting and we finally have a snug fit of that moon. Time to work on the key for the arm. Make sure when you're sanding this down, you go slowly, like I said, and go in the shape of the key. Take a little off at a time because you don't want to end up taking too much off that key and then trying to figure a way out to get that to stick to the body or glue it to the body without having major problems. Like I showed you, I went around that key in the shape and now I tested it and we're good to go. That arm fits in there nice and snug. Now that cleanup is done, I have all the pieces primed and we're going to do the base with Pro Acryl's Neutral Gray. And so begins the painting process. We have our Tamiya turntable here. If you don't have one of these things, go get one. They're indispensable. Great tool to have when you're painting. This way you can turn your model around while you're painting. You don't got to fumble with it in your hands. But like I said, we're just putting on the neutral gray all over the base. We'll get that painted up, let it dry, and then we'll clear coat it. And the clear coat we're using is Mr. Super Clear's matte, and that'll go on there now. The next thing I'm going to work on is the cityscape. Looking at the cartoon, some of these buildings are really dark blue, some of them are black. Not all of the windows are lit up either, and they're not yellow, they are white. So we're just going to do some of the windows and get this painted up like you see in the cartoon picture here. Black on the top of the buildings, black on this building here, and then blue and black on this little building over here. Time to paint up the black on the buildings. The black I use is Ammo by Miggs because the coal black from Monument Hobbies is a little too on the gray side for me. I wanted these nice and dark black. The only problem that I have with Ammo by Mig, painting it, it does come out thin, so you have to put a few layers on. But the biggest problem I have is if you touch it, it really rubs off and it flakes off if you bump into it. So you got to make sure if you're using the Ammo by Mig black, once you're done and it's nice and dry, make sure that you seal it in this way that you don't get all those scratch marks and stuff like that in the black. I don't know why it's so soft like that, but it is. The next thing I'm going to paint in are the windows, and we're just going to use that same black. We're going to fill in most of these windows with black like we saw in the animation. Very few of them are going to be painted white because she's supposed to be flying around at night when not many people are awake. So let's get the black in the windows. For the windows, we're going to use Pro Acryl's Bold Titanium White, and this is going to take a few coats. This is a great white. I haven't had any problems with this, and in only 2 coats, I get a nice solid white. And for the buildings, we're going to use Monument Hobbies again, Pro Acryl Dark Gray Blue, because that's kind of what it is in the cartoon. They're dark gray blue, and then you have your blacks in there also. Now, how I thin out my paints is I use the Joe Hudson method. Thank you, Joe, for telling us how to do this. With the Pro Acryl, I use 5 drops of thinner. I use AK Interactive Thinner. You can use water, and 2 drops of paint. This thins it out nicely. This way I don't get any brush marks, and it's a nice thin coat. And I could put multiple coats on and have it come out very nicely. And we are making progress, my friends. We got the dark gray blue on there, the black. We have this attached to the base, and I have it all seal coated in with Mr. Super Clear's matte. So this is all done. I really like the look of just a few lights in there. Makes it really feel like it's nighttime. For the background, I mixed Pro Acryl blue with dark blue, 5 drops of the blue to 1 drop of the dark blue, but you may want to change that mixture for yourself. Now I'm just taking that mixture, starting to spray up the background. I'm going to try to avoid the stars as much as possible because I don't want to have to try to paint white over the darker background. It's going to be a little bit of a pain in the neck, so let me paint up this background. And just a spoiler, I painted over all the stars. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to paint these little clouds in, and we're going to use the bold titanium white with blue. I'm only going to put a little touch of blue in it. What I was doing was taking a pinhead and putting little drops in until I got a color I wanted. I airbrushed the clouds in an irregular pattern, and I left the blue from the background showing through. I recorded it, but I was having so much problem with tip dry, it was ridiculous. The next thing I got to do is there's little lines around these clouds. I'm going to hand paint those in. I painted the lines in with a 20-0 brush because they are tiny lines. I used just the bold titanium white on that, and I also got the stars painted in. I do have a little touch up on the top star there, but otherwise this is good to go. I did paint the sides and the back using coal black. Now it's time to put the moon in here. What I'm feeling for is I still have some divots from the support marks, and those actually were a key for me so that I knew which side to put towards the back, because that side for some reason with the divots actually made it fit better and with less of a gap up front. And here's the completed base, all done up, just a little CA in the key in the back, stuck it down, let it sit, and we have a finished base. And my favorite feature of the diorama, the Bewitched logo. We're going to go with the Ammo by MIG black on the background, and then we're going to cut this in with white. But before we do the white, because I know I'm going to get black all over it, I'm going to put an ivory down first to make that white a little bit bolder. Putting down the black onto the Bewitched symbol, I'm going to make sure this is really saturated because I want a nice deep black behind that white to make the logo really pop out behind Samantha. The black is nice and rich on there. Now I have to clear coat this because I told you about the Ammo by MIG rubbing off. I want to make sure we're good on that. I'm going to start painting up her arms, her dress, and all that good stuff. I'm going to use blue black because in the cartoon she is not in a black dress. It's in a very, very dark blue dress. So that's what we're going to go with, blue black, and we'll get to painting that. The hat has a red band around it, and we're going to use bold Pyrrole red on that. We're also going to use that on the underside of the cape when we get to that. My first layer is going to be with bright ivory before we go with the white, because if we go direct white, we're going to have a really hard time making it nice and bright. This is going to help us make those colors pop even more. I'm going to make a major mistake later on in this build, not using a bright ivory before certain colors. It looks white, but it's not white. This is the bright ivory. We've got everything cut in. Now we're going to go with white over this. This is the titanium white over that ivory, and you can see how it punched it up a notch. This is the first time you'll see me working on the broom, and what I'm painting it with is Pro Acryl's pale yellow, because the bristles should be more of a dulled down yellow effect. They shouldn't really be that bright, but we're going to change some of this later on. Not the color, but we're going to change something on the broom bristles. I'm constantly making mistakes. Why I painted the hands first with an olive flesh, I don't know, but the proper color would have been a warm flesh from Pro Acryl, and that's what I'm using now. Going to be painting up both of her hands, her face, her neck, all that good stuff, her legs with the warm flesh by Pro Acryl. So this is where my dilemma came in with the broom. I was trying washes and painting all the little bristles at the bottom, but they're deep enough to see, but not deep enough to hold that wash. So I went back and looked at the cartoon, and they're really not there. I went in and sanded all that down, so I got to strip the paint off, and then we're going to repaint everything. We're going to change that broom handle too because it's too dark as compared to the cartoon. As you can tell, I'm all over the place with my builds. We got her flesh on, we did her little shoes in there, and we got her dress done. Now it's all seal coated in. This way we don't lose any of that paint, and I could put a little flesh wash between her legs. I use Pro Acryl's flesh wash. This way it has a little definition between the legs, and it doesn't look like just a blob or one set of legs just sitting there in the middle of the air. Now the broom is completed. I actually used 4 different colors on the broom. I changed up the broom handle And that I used golden brown on. Once the camera decides it's going to focus on that, golden brown was for the broom handle because it was more of the color that we saw in the cartoon. On the bristles, we went back to the original color, the pale yellow. And again, focus please. This way it looks like broom bristles. Next up is the little lines and the thing that holds the bristles together, and that's just dark golden brown. And finally, on the piece that goes into the back of the diorama, I used dark blue to help it blend in with the sky. After the broom, I just moved back over to the hands, threw a little flesh wash between the fingers so they're separated. It's time to start painting the cape, and over here I used the dark blue, and the top side of the cape is done. We still got to get underneath, and that's going to be the bold pyrrole red. I'm going to do this by hand, but that was not the way to go. It just wasn't working out. It would have been quicker with the airbrush, so I moved over to the airbrush, sprayed it in, and got a nice solid color. The cape is all nicey nice. We got our red on one side, blue on the other. I just had to touch up around the edges, which was no big deal. That was a lot easier than hand painting all of that in. Now it's time to work on that famous animated head. I have everything primed up. Her face is going to be the warm flesh, but don't paint her eyeballs white because they weren't white in the animation. They were painted the warm flesh color or the flesh color, whichever flesh you decide you're going to use. So just paint the whole thing flesh and then paint the detail colors in. I'm sorry I didn't show you painting this in, but my eyes are bad and I have to have her close to my face. I got to figure out better camera angles for you guys. But we used the bright pyrrole red on her lips. I used the black on her eyebrows and her eyes. Of course, white on her teeth. I did have a few touch-ups to do. You can see under her eye, the flesh is a little bit different than the other flesh, but that's okay. It looks decent. Now to work on Samantha's hair, and what we're going to use is warm yellow for her hair, but this is where I made a huge mistake. I should have painted ivory over that primer, and then I should have used the warm yellow, because painting the warm yellow directly onto her hair just did not work out well at first. So I ended up going over to the airbrush after I decided I was going to try to hand paint this. Some parts came out good. Where the flesh tones went onto her hair, it really popped that out. But I went in with the airbrush and really brought out the color of the yellow. And of course I used my Silly Putty mask before I sprayed her hair. We got her hair nice and popped out, nice bright yellow. Now to take this off and see if I messed anything up, because I really don't want to have to repaint her face. But I think I actually know that it came out well. So her face came out well. I didn't have to touch up anything. Now I just have to seal coat her in. Her face is seal coat where I'm touching. I just have to seal coat her hair, and that's good to go. Now it's time to get this body together, and this is where I find out that I made a mistake by not test fitting all the parts properly. I thought this arm fit. I did not paint inside the key. You can see the primer is still, well, actually it's not the primer. I didn't even prime in there. I didn't prime on the peg either that goes into the female portion of the key. When I start to put this arm in, first I'm going to put in my CA glue. This is pre-finding out that the key doesn't fit. Now I'm trying to fit the arm in and it does not fit in. So what I have to do is I have to shave down that key. And unfortunately, when I do shave down the male portion of the key, I hit the blue and I had to repaint the blue. And here's another thing that rubs off. That yuckiness on the top corner there, that was the AK Ultra Matte. But I shaved down that pin and I could get the arm in there now, and we're not going to have any problems with the fit. I just have to get this all painted back up and make it look good without getting any blue onto my flesh. The other side is all fixed up. Now to get her left arm in there, which I know that one fits. So I just put a little CA in there. Now I got to hold it down and make sure that it stays, and we will have a full body. And there she is, all together, looking pretty good, I think. I added some CA down the key, and now we're just going to pop her head in there, make sure that it's aligned right with the sides, and that V in the front doesn't push too far down. You want to keep that level with the dress, and she finally has a head. I really love this from UEL Winter. It's a great kit, and she looks awesome, just like in the animation. Now let's get some CA in this key, and then we could get her hat on. Don't worry about if you get a little CA outside of this hole. Her hat is big enough where it's going to cover that. We're going to pop the hat on, and we will have a full Samantha from Bewitched. Well, her body, or her character at least, until we get her on the broom in the background. Hold up, wait a minute, we didn't have a full body. I forgot, we still had to put the cape on. The cape was disastrous. I chipped the corner, I had to touch that up. The two little pinholes, like I said, way at the beginning are small. So you're better off shaving those off, putting on CA, and holding it in place. I'm not going to lie, while I was holding it in place, I had help from my wife to spray some Instaset on there to make sure that the cape stayed in place. This whole thing is pretty heavy. It's all solid resin, hat, cape, head, arms, and body. So when you're putting it on the broom, make sure that it's on there really good. This is the only problem attaching the broom to her body. There's only really one way to do it, and you can see the CA on the outside of her leg. Because of the semicircle, you can't put the glue in to begin with. If you push the broom through, it's going to push all that glue to the front, and you're going to have to strip it down or wait and paint that last. I decided to paint it first because her body's going to be facing the wall, and you're never going to see that, so I'm not worried about that at all. She's all done riding her broom, and now we could get her on the back of the base. Putting some CA in the next to last key. This is for the Bewitched logo, so I'm just making sure it's in there good. This thing does tilt a little bit, so just make sure when you're putting the Bewitched logo in there that you have it straight. So now I'm getting to pop it in, and this looks so awesome on this base. Thank you again, UEL, for making this. This is just a diorama that brings me back to my childhood, watching reruns of all the great old shows. I wish there were shows like this today. Adding CA into the final key. Thinking back on this, I probably should have used 5-minute epoxy with how heavy she is, and we're going to be able to put her into her base and see the final effect. Before I go, I want to thank all of my YouTube members and our Patreon members. Thank you very much for all the support and helping to keep the channel going. Words are hard today. Words are very hard. But without you guys, I wouldn't be able to do all I do. So thank you very much. If you want to join the membership, just go to the front page of our YouTube channel and you can hit the join button, or come over to our Patreon and I'll put a link for that in the description below. And there she is, getting locked into place as I hold her. I hope you enjoyed this build. Now stick around for the final pictures.